Hello, we're here with Jen. How are you, Jen?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for being with us today.
Of course.
I will jump right in. Please introduce yourself and what it is that you do.
Yeah. So my name is Jenn Whitmer. I live in the States, right in the center of the country. And I am a coach and a speaker and a writer. And I work with people um, really working on conflict and communication and personality clashes. And I use the Enneagram as one of my main tools for that, but also do other communications training and conflict resolution and peacemaking strategies and skills. Really, so people can have great relationships and whole and happy lives. That's really what I'm going for. So yeah.
Amazing. Could you please explain a little bit about the Enneagram? Because I'm not sure
Yeah,
that everyone knows.
absolutely. So if you're like, what were these words? What is that? Ennea what?
Yeah.
So the Enneagram is a personality tool. So there's lots and lots of personality tools out there. I've used many of them in the course of my leadership and work that I have done. But what I've discovered is that the Enneagram brings the most amount of change for people. It's the best tool for people to work on themselves and bring some self-awareness and really healing to their lives. It's not just it's an observer, but it also has tools with it. So the Enneagram shows us 9 different ways of being in the world, 9 different ways of seeing. And so the personalities are divided by 9, and each of them has a number. So some people will say, oh, I'm a 2 or I'm a 4. And some people will say it like, I identify as a 4 or I work best as a 5. They might, it depends on who you're talking to, how they say it, but that's the number is how they identify themselves. And what's also great about the Enneagram, it's not just like, oh, there's 9 static types of people in the world. There it goes into a lot of shade and variance that allows for different cultures, that allows for different expressions. So I like to say, like, if you're a 9 and you are blue, somebody else who is a 9, you might be navy blue and they might be pale blue, but you
Hmm.
still are motivated by the same thing because the Enneagram is working with the why, the underneath why we do what we do, not just the behavior expression of what we do. So that's what the Enneagram is. And that's why it's such a great tool because it gets down to the why of something and how we are in the world.
Amazing. I love that.
Mhm.
I'm all about understanding the why. I've spent like my adult life trying to figure out why it is that I do what I do and why people do what they do. So very much into that. Cool. Can you please share with us how it is that you got to doing what you do today?
Oh boy, that's such a story. So I started out my career as an educator. So I worked in preschool and elementary school education and middle school education. So here in the States, that's kind of age 3 through 14. That's where most of my teaching career and experiences. And I started as a teacher in the music classroom, and then I was a faculty leader, and then I became an administrator. So I was somebody who was running a school, like an assistant head of school. My title was director, but that's what we did. I had a partner that kind of shared that role, and it was so much fun. I loved education. I loved working with kids, and I really loved working with teachers. And I liked the training aspect because I'm still a teacher. I liked helping train teachers to do their job better. I loved helping parents understand what they could do as parents, helping their kids' education and helping the whole child. So I've been about whole people for a long time. And I had really great leaders, and then I didn't. So I had a leader that came that he really struggled. He wasn't in a great position for his skill set. He had had some past experiences that he hadn't managed or healed from. And that started to come out in our organization. And there was a lot of mismanaged and just not managed conflict. And it really destroyed our group. We were a growing, vibrant, really healthy culture that over the course of just a couple years was destroyed. The school is still there and it's come back, but it's not what it was. And it was so sad and just grievous to walk through this process and as a community. And that was really hard for me because I'm a big community person and I want to contribute to the community. And because of his unhealth, there were lots of issues that came back to me. I was blamed for several things. I lost my job, but got to stay at the school in this weird position. So it was very strange. But in the course of that, I discovered the Enneagram and had some one-on-one training in conflict resolution and peacemaking. So I studied under somebody who was trying to help the school, and she really recognized that the problem wasn't like with one person. The problem wasn't me. But she also was like, you would do really well with this. One, because you don't like conflict, but two, you do it well. And so she gave me a lot of training in how to help people understand conflict, how to mediate through conflict. And so I got a lot of great skills from this master trainer in conflict resolution. And also at the same time, I was discovering the Enneagram and like why I was so frustrated with the responses of this leader and really understanding that what it was doing was touching on really old stories in myself, thinking, and I want to think that he wasn't doing that deliberately. I still want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it was really redemptive in that it brought a ton of freedom for me, not being tied up in somebody else's idea of me. And so there was a situation that it was finally like, I need to leave. This is not a place I can stay. And so I left and started doing coaching and then started teaching as a speaker and realizing, oh, I want other people to have these skills, to know themselves, to be able to manage conflict well. Because the things that I discovered is that leadership, self-leadership, and leadership in an organization really rises and falls on your ability to handle the hard things, the ability to handle conflict. And how you do that is how you know yourself. So this conflict resolution training and the Enneagram training just kind of morphed into training other people and really helping others find that same freedom. So that's how I ended up doing what I do. So I'm still a teacher. I just now teach on
Amazing.
something that is a little bit different, and still really passionate about helping people live whole lives and seeing themselves as a whole person, and and helping people get over some of those, like, I'm avoiding them in the office, or I don't want to walk in the kitchen because they're there, or, oh, why can't I get along with this other personality? And that's what I love helping people through, to help them really resolve that conflict, to have peace and freedom for themselves and a stronger community relationship.
Amazing.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted
Yeah.
to just pick up on the thing that you said that you've been kind of interested or seeing a whole person. You mentioned that
Hmm.
like at the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about that? About when did you start seeing people
Yeah.
as whole people? Like I'd like
Yeah.
to hear a bit more.
Yeah. I think, looking back, I probably started thinking about that in my early 20s, because my first job was as a music teacher, and school, like I probably could have taught a lot of things. I'm fine with math. I love reading. I love writing, so I could have been an English teacher. I could have taught math. I really loved chemistry. I could have taught a lot of different things, but I chose music because it felt like it covered everything. Like, because you do math and you do culture and you do history. I have a history minor. I loved that. And so I think I started thinking about the fact that what can cover it all. Some of that is because I don't ever want to feel left out. I don't want to miss something. But some of it is just because, like, oh, everything is encompassed here. I can express all of the emotions and all of the intelligence and all of the information in music. And then, so I don't think that I thought about it as whole people, but I think that's where I first started thinking about wholeness. And then, honestly, as I did theological studies, the concept of shalom and the concept of peace, and what that shalom is bigger than just the absence of conflict. It's goodness, it's greatness, it's wholeness and rightness, and that, as a person of faith, just started wanting to say, that's my job here on earth, is to start helping and working toward wholeness in the parts that I can play. And so that's when I'm talking about wholeness. That's really what I'm thinking about, is living in kind of making the wrong things right, and putting things back together in a peaceful and whole way. So I
Hmm.
think that's where that came from.
That's amazing. That's really beautiful. That really is. It's really amazing.
Mhm.
Okay,
I
and
don't think
what?
anybody's ever asked me that before in that way. So it's kind of funny
No,
thinking
it
about.
was just it was something that I haven't really heard many people. Okay, holistic, yes, but saying
Sure.
whole children and whole people, and you've seen it, and it just something that kind of stuck out to me.
Mhm.
Um, Amazing. Okay, and what tools or skills do you think got you through that difficult time with the leader, the issues that you
Yeah.
had
Whew. Well, one, friends, because I wasn't alone. I was in a team, so that was really helpful to me. And I think, I know that's not a skill, but I have cultivated that. Like, I was intentional about building community with people and making sure that people knew that they could come talk to me and say, here's the problem that I'm having, like, and asking for feedback. So that's the tool, but the result was the community, the community, the team of people around me. And because we had come to this relationship where I could say, hey, are you seeing this in me? This seems to be a problem for this person, but I can't tell. So can you help me? Can you give me feedback? Can you let me see what you see? Because we have a limited perspective of ourselves, and we do need to know ourselves, and that includes getting what we can't see from other people. So I found that really helpful. So that's one tool. Another tool was really discovering the Enneagram. And that's the inner knowledge that I couldn't necessarily see, and others couldn't see either, because they couldn't see in my internal world. And so what I loved about the Enneagram is it shone a light into that area that I was unaware of, almost like a blind spot, because I couldn't see it and people on the outside couldn't see it. And so the Enneagram was like, "Whoop, look there." And it was like, oh, that's where this issue is. I'm getting caught up
amazing.
in this story that I didn't even know it was connected. So when he was saying XYZ, and he was saying that you're too loud, you're too much, that you can't do this, like when he was saying those things, it touched on the story in me that I didn't want to miss out, that I didn't want to be trapped, that an old, and this idea was coming up in me. So the Enneagram helped me see that. And whenever you bring something into the light, then you can deal with it. So that was one of the main tools of how the Enneagram helped me. And I think another tool was I'm actually a really good listener. And I'm not awesome in the sense of, like, I just let you talk for a long time. I'm still learning on how to not interrupt people, because that's just also the natural talk style of my family. So there's a lot of conversation that happens over one another. But I am really good at repeating back. Like, is this what you're saying? I didn't have an assumption that what I heard was exactly right. And so that tool was incredibly helpful to me in this conversation, because I didn't know it. Like, I wasn't trying to entrap my boss. But what was happening was he would say something and I would repeat. I was like, okay, so are you saying this? Help me understand. And he would then change the story. And I was like, okay, so here's what I heard you say the first time. And here's what I heard you say the second time. And they feel different. So can you clarify again? And because I kept coming back with that listening, it would, the revelation that he didn't actually know what he was talking about, that he was trying to play different sides, he wasn't being honest, naturally came out. that's not what I was after. I wasn't like, "Ooh, I'm gonna catch him in a lie." That wasn't my posture, but it was like, "I don't understand and I want to listen well." And that skill was incredibly helpful for me as I was going through that. So I was really had built into community. So I was listening to other people. I was using the Enneagram to discover about myself and just using that reflexive listening to seeking to understand is the best way to say it. But because I was seeking to understand, it revealed something about the other person. And that was really helpful. So then I didn't feel as crazy because I was like, okay, it's clear that you're saying three different things. And we're not sure what's happening. And so I think those are the biggest ones that helped me through that time.
Very, very important ones as well that we also don't always think about or hear about, or so the fact that you asked for clarification and that you did listen, that's really awesome that that naturally kind of came to you, but now you also know that that's something that will help you in the future, overcoming challenges. I really like how when we go through a challenge, a life challenge, we can then look back and see what helped us through, and that can take us through for the next. That's something that we have in our toolbox, and that's something that I really like to look at as well. How
Absolutely.
how did you come across the Enneagram, by the way? Like, did you just randomly hear about it?
It's such a funny story. So when I was in college, so that was about 20 years before this time, I was a leader on campus. Like I was part of a leadership program. I was then a resident assistant. So I was one of the students in the dorm that helped manage other students. And that's called a resident assistant. And that residence life program, we did what's called the Myers-Briggs, which MBTI, I think most people have heard of, or if you've heard of like, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm a perceiver, I'm a feeler, like those combination of letters. We used that.
Yeah.
And one of the leaders on campus was like, you should look into the Enneagram. I think you'd really like it. And it was like on a old copied sheet of paper. It was like purple because it was a copy of a mimeograph, which is an even older, before the Xerox machine. And I was like, it was a grid, and it was like, it's like it wasn't cool. I was 18, 19 years old, and I was like, what is this thing? The Myers-Briggs over here is telling me why I like to be around people. So this is great for me. It was fine. And so it came up at different times throughout, and I just think I wasn't ready for it. Honestly, I don't know if I was ready to hear what it had to say. And so then, fast forward 20 years, one of the counselors at school, who was the school counselor, who was also a friend of mine, she was like, so I like Myers-Briggs, but here's why I like the Enneagram. And I was like, so tell me more about that. I've heard this before. Why is this a thing? And so she told me more about it, and a book had just come out by two authors that had been doing the Enneagram for about 20 years. And it wasn't a thick book. It was like a primer, it was like a good introduction to the Enneagram. And so I started reading that in the middle of this time of what is happening? Why is my life falling apart because of this leader? So I think I was in a moment of really looking for something to answer some questions that my preference for the big picture wasn't enough. My preference for going with the flow didn't answer why this was such an angst-filled, difficult, devastating really time. And the Enneagram provided some of those answers. So it was kind of something I'd heard about over the years, but that was when I really discovered it. I think I was just in a moment of really needing something to help me deeply understand myself. And I kind of understood myself. I had some levels of self-awareness, but this was at a deeper level, and gave me language for things I didn't know. Like I'd felt it, and then I was like, oh, that's what that is. Like that's the words that I didn't have to describe this inner world. So from there, after I left, I was like, this has been so helpful for me. I think I want to get certified in this. I think I want to learn more, because, teachers always go back to learn things. And so I'd finished a grad degree in communication and culture, and then kind of was doing this certification on the side. So that's how I discovered the Enneagram. And in that time, the Enneagram, at least in the States, has become very popular. Doesn't originate in America, but it's become very popular in a lot of circles in the United States. And so it's been fun to share that with people and the real depth of the Enneagram, that it's not just a party trick. It's something that can bring some real awareness and change in your life. So that's how I discovered it.
I asked because I like to help people on their self-healing journeys, and
Mhm.
a lot of the time it's how do we find the tools? Where do we look?
Mhm.
And these kind of things are. Um, I find it really interesting how, for example, I've never heard of the Enneagram before I spoke to you, before I met you.
Mhm.
And then that you had it multiple times show up in your life, and
Wow,
I
it's so
find it
funny.
so interesting how it's
Mhm.
as though the universe was nudging you, like, you need to look at this, you need to listen, like, and then
Mhm.
you said maybe you weren't ready to hear, what it had to tell you and to like kind of go into this whole area. And
Mhm.
I just find it very curious and intriguing how things work out and how things happen. I'm becoming a little bit more open to perhaps spiritual kind of
Yeah.
concepts and things going on, because I'm really noticing these kind of things happening. And again, I never heard of it, and yet you had it multiple times, and then now you use it as a tool to help others, like, and I think there's something going on.
Yeah, I think it's
um,
interesting, and I think it was a protection in some ways, because when at least for me, and I've experienced this with most teachers, when they learn something new, they're like, oh, I want to share it with other people. I want you to know this too. And that's a common teacher personality. And I think I would have misused the tool. Like, I think
hmm.
it would have been a party trick, or it would have been something that I wouldn't have as deeply dug
You
into.
mean in
Because
the
you can,
past, had
yes,
you? Oh,
in
okay.
the past, I think that I wouldn't have gotten out of it the real transformative work that it's possible. I would have just been like, "Oh yeah, that was that other fun thing I did. It
Yeah.
was so interesting." I don't know if I was ready for it yet. And that's just me. Like, I just think that's the protection of God for me.
No, but
Um,
I think that
mhm.
timing is very, very applicable and relevant to self-healing. Like sometimes, people,
Yeah.
I'm always thinking, how can I get through to this person? Maybe they're just not there yet. Maybe they're just not
Mhm.
ready yet. And I think that there is this concept of timing in someone's journey. Um,
Absolutely.
but I also really like the fact that you mentioned that you knew how to now. Uh, verbalize or express what it was that you're feeling. Like now there are words to go to it. I've really found that helpful as well, like, and it's so exciting as well, that moment
Yeah.
when you're like, oh, that's what it is. Like, oh my god.
Exactly.
I really
Exactly.
really like that you picked up that you mentioned
Uh-huh.
that. I Okay, you touched a couple of times on this, on how difficult it was for you in that period of time, with this conflict that you were facing with this leader or with your boss. And I was wondering if you feel comfortable, would you be able to share a little bit about the difficulty there, like the challenges there? You said
Mhm.
you felt like it was the hardest time going on, but like, could you tell a little bit more about what happened there, like what kind of
Yeah.
challenges you were facing?
Absolutely. So there were some, specifics to the circumstance that, but I think are not necessarily universal, but reflected in other people's experiences. So, our leader, like I had said, that he didn't have the skills to lead in the way that we as an organization needed. And so, as we often do as humans, when we feel insecure, we attack others and we obfuscate and we try to hide. And so, because of that setup, and I'm the person that's like, wait, what? I'm raising my hand and asking the questions. I became kind of the face of the opposition, even though that I didn't know that. That was like, I found out later that was what was in his head. And so I would come privately and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. I'm noticing it's impacting us as a team in this way, in my formal review, in meetings with my kind of co-assistant head, we would come together and say, hey, we're really struggling with this. Can you help us? And he just kind of made us think that that's not what was happening. So I didn't know the term gaslighting at the time, but that's really what was going on. Like, oh, no, 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 that's not, you don't understand. Let me tell you what that's like. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. I want to be a nice person, but I'm also not understanding. And I wasn't used to not understanding in my life. Usually I could kind of figure it out. This was so different. My therapist later called it crazy making. And I'm like, yes, it felt crazy making that I and the other 6 people in the room observed it in this way. But our leader is saying, no, 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 that's not what happened. This is actually what happened. So it was so confusing. And I just remember feeling confused over and over and over again. And then because of the attacking nature, I then started to feel incredibly insecure myself of like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I really am a mean person, because he was saying that. He's like, like maybe I really am unkind, or, like all of these things that he was saying in not an attacking way, but a passive aggressive attack. So it didn't come across as overt because he was always very, very nice. Very nice. But it was like, oh gosh. So this deep sense of confusion and then frustration. So I would come home and my husband is like, this is nuts. You need to leave. And I'm like, but how do I leave? How do I leave this team? How do I leave? Our kids were in the school. How do I leave this place where our kids, like, I didn't understand. So all of that was coming together and starting to see that I was feeling very trapped. Like I was feeling trapped in this cycle of crazy making and gaslighting. I was feeling very trapped in not being able to leave because at the time my husband had lost his job. So I was the only income and it was like nothing. It was a very small salary. And so I just was feeling so trapped. And that's kind of what the Enneagram helped me see, that this touches on you feeling trapped in a cycle that you're never going to get out of. And that's a deep fear of mine. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to stay here forever and I'm never going to be positive again. I'm never going to get out of this. I'm never going to solve the problem. And so we all don't want to be trapped and we all want to solve the problem. But for my particular Enneagram personality, that is super deep. Like that is a core issue for me. So and then we had, I mean, long story short, there were a couple interventions. We tried an outside person coming in and I became the scapegoat. And I remember just realizing that, oh my gosh, this is over. I didn't know that. Like I just kept thinking positively that we can solve this. We can solve this relationship. We can solve this problem. And we couldn't because there weren't 2 willing parties. There were 5 willing people and 1 unwilling person. And because that was the leader, it didn't work. And so you really do have to have lots of people working together to solve a problem. And I had just never experienced that before. And then you add the attacking nature and all of that to it. It just was devastating. I mean, I can remember sitting on my couch just at such a low state and bawling, crying, like, why am I even a parent? Like, if I can't function in this, how can I, we have 4 kids, and how can I be a mom to 4 kids if this is who I am, who he says I am? And so it was so devastating. And so those were some of the difficulties that were really deep. And walking out of gaslighting, walking out of crazy making, and walking into, oh, I'm not going to be trapped here forever. I can let this go. I can actually leave. I have that freedom that I didn't think that I had. And my therapist, I was like, I need this man's voice out of my head. I'm reading and I'm hearing him say, like all of these phrases that were so mean. And she was like, because he trained you. He trained you to think about him in that way because he wanted to control you. And I was like, oh my gosh, if he trained me, I can untrain that. I can retrain my brain to think something differently. And she was like, absolutely. So I didn't like, it was this big revelation of like, oh, wait, I can I can get this voice out of my head. I have to retrain myself. And I was like, yes, that I know how to do. Like a self-talk is important and how we talk to ourselves and observing my thoughts and reframing things. Like I can do that. I just didn't know that's what had happened because I was so devastated in the moment. So that's some of the depth of that situation.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that it is I think it's so important that you shared that. So thank you. I really do feel that, when we say I had a bad boss, he's not nice, he's this, he makes us think we're, whatever. But when you really imagine what that feels like and what it's abuse. It's an
Yeah,
abusive um situation, it's an abusive environment, it's an abusive reality, and that really has a huge effect on us, and it's
totally.
far more serious and and deep and devastating than it sounds at first. Like when you say,
Hmm.
"Oh, I had a really bad boss and he didn't know how to lead." You can't really understand or gauge like how bad that can be.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
I
was
think it really
super
is important.
hesitant to call it abuse. I was super hesitant to call it a toxic work environment, even though if you looked up the definitions, that is what we were
It is,
experiencing.
yeah.
But I just didn't want to admit that that's what was happening, that I had got. And it gave me so much compassion for when people, are like, why doesn't she just leave her abusive husband? I'm like, oh, I know why now. Like, I get it. And
You
I've
don't
never,
see it when
you
you're
don't
in it.
see it. Yeah.
Uh,
And I've never experienced that on a relational level, in my personal life in that way, like as a boyfriend or a husband or a dad or anything. I've never experienced that. So it was shocking to me to happen in the workplace. And until one of our team members, who is just a lovely and wise woman, she left in the middle of this and she's like, this isn't okay. And he can't continue to behave this way. And she leaving was right, but anyway, it was like right in the middle of, oh, okay, all and like the brick started to tumble, and like the facade came off, the board started to see. But I think her labeling that was the first time I was like, oh, that's what that means. I just thought a toxic work environment was just I don't know. I don't know what I thought it was. I was living in it, and the abuse factor was really hard to label it as that. And I still feel uncomfortable with that, but that is what happened. I think, and I feel uncomfortable because he wouldn't call it that. He'd be like, "That wasn't my intention." It's rarely someone's intention. It's
yeah.
rarely, and it's always about our impact and what the impact is on the other person.
Um, yeah, 100%. And thank you. There's also another thing that you mentioned that is really incredible to me, that it was the minute you realized that he trained you, like it was as though you became conditioned to think certain ways by him, that you could
Hmm.
retrain and unlearn and fit, kind of correct that. So many people do not understand that concept,
Hmm.
and don't even believe that that's doable and possible. And I think the fact that you're like, oh, okay, I can retrain myself. Yes, I know I could do that. That's incredible that you have that. Like, it's so rare.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that retraining and unlearning, and that it's a skill that is so crucial and important and needed, because there's so much to unlearn in our society, and then,
Oh, yeah.
and then a lot of our work environments and households, and like
Hmm.
there's just so much to unlearn,
Yeah.
and retrain. But the fact that you knew that it was possible, like, already, was like you got a head start against,
I
like,
guess.
cool.
Well, you know what? This is going to sound totally cheesy, but it's true. So I'm just going to be honest. I
Go for
can remember I really loved Oprah when she had a show, when her show was on. I loved it. And it was on right after I got home from school as a teacher. And I would watch Oprah and get dinner ready and do that kind of stuff. And she had an author on of a book about self-talk. And I was probably 23 years old. We had just moved to it. We'd been married for a couple years. We just moved to St. Louis. I was a new teacher. And it was the first time I'd ever heard this concept of you can observe your thought, but you don't have to believe the thought. I was like, oh. And so she had this author on. I don't even remember who the author was. I got the book. And so I think that that was the beginning of me learning that. Now, at 23, it was this new concept. At 40, by that point, I was like, oh, I've done this before. I do know that it changes me. I do know that the way I think about myself affects all of the rest. And I don't have to believe every thought that comes across my mind. But because I'd been so hurt and so much gaslighting just causes you to just really question yourself so much. Like I'd gotten so much better at like, oh, this thought isn't helpful. But it kind of broke down all of those abilities in that toxic environment. I had to be like, oh, wait, I did do that once. I know that's possible. So it wasn't fast. I would say it was still another probably 6 months before I was like, oh, I'm not hearing that voice in my head anymore. So I don't want to give the impression that it was instant, but there was an instant revelation of that it's possible. Like, oh, this is a thing we can do.
But I hope you're aware of how rare it is that you'd heard of specifically this tool that
Mhm.
so many people don't know about today
Yeah.
still. I mean,
Yeah.
and you heard about it a while ago, we are saying,
Mhm.
which is it's insane. I mean, I only realized that we can retrain our brains what, 4 years ago, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah.
And for so many people it's total unknown, totally new. So
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
You were meant to be doing what you're doing, Jen. 100%.
Thanks. Thanks.
All right, we're gonna have to wrap up because
Oh,
I
yes,
have
yes, we are.
another call to come. But thank you, Jen, for sharing and for sharing your time as well and your journey.
Absolutely.
You're awesome, and I hope to stay in touch. Thank you.
Yes, great. Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.